For Johnston.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to start by thanking the member for Fong Lim for expanding this conversation to the big questions. What is a budget? Who's it for? And I absolutely agree with him on one thing, that budgets are about more than just spending. That's right, they're about people. Whether the people we represent can access the services they need to live safe, healthy lives. That's a responsibility entrusted to us as their elected representatives. It's the responsibility of anyone in government, whatever their political party, and I note the motion and I note the amendment, and in response I want to say I'm interested in looking forward and working together here in this chamber for all the people across the Northern Territory that all of us represent, not wasting the limited time we have in this chamber with the political attacks that both parties continue to engage with. Mr Deputy Speaker, the budget is not some force of nature beyond our control. The budget is a set of decisions by the government, and it tells Territorians what the people who you've elected to look after you are doing with your money. It tells you what they prioritise, how the government plans to spend your money, and what kind of future this government's trying to build. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, the economy is not separate from the health of our society, it's a reflection of it. The member for Fong Lim also said, like it or not, we need more prison cells. Member for Fong Lim, that's not a fact, that's a choice. It's a choice to keep pouring billions into prisons as a band-aid while ignoring the root causes of crime. And what makes that claim even more extraordinary is that the member for Fong Lim also told this House he's the most fiscally conservative person in this building, because there's nothing fiscally conservative about spending around $1.3 million a year to keep a single child in detention where they're at much higher risk of recidivism once they leave, while refusing to invest in the early intervention that would actually stop that child being there in the first place. It's just not fiscally smart. So I do also agree with the member for Fong Lim that we need to be economically responsible, and that's exactly why we need a people-centred budget, not as a soft alternative to economic responsibility, but as the most strategic, effective and future-focused way to build a stronger, fairer Northern Territory. Because, Mr Deputy Speaker, people are the economy. And speaking of people, this government has spent a lot of time since the announcement of the budget talking about everyday Territorians. So I'd like to clarify what that means, because every time this government says everyday Territorians, there's a question hanging in the air. Which ones? This budget is not constrained by scarcity, despite what the government will try and make you believe. It's defined by choices. And the question is not whether we can afford to support people, it's who this government is choosing to support. Mr Deputy Speaker, everyday Territorians are the renters who cannot find an affordable home. They're the workers turning down jobs in my electorate who come to me and say that because they cannot find somewhere to live. They're the families stuck in overcrowded housing with no way out. So which everyday Territorians who are looking for safe housing does this budget back? Because it's not them. The gap between social housing and the private rental market remains untouched. The $608 million allocated to remote housing, land servicing and essential services is welcome, but it needs to be matched with the services that actually make housing work. And we've heard that from yourself, Mr Deputy Speaker. It needs to be matched with maintenance, with tenancy support, with community infrastructure. With $40 million, we could establish a Territory Affordable Rental Fund to deliver hundreds of affordable homes for key workers, for low-income renters and people transitioning out of homelessness. That would be an investment that grows, that leverages funding and delivers lasting housing. Instead, this budget leaves those people locked out. Mr Deputy Speaker, everyday Territorians are the people in remote communities who've seen infrastructure promised time and time again without the services needed to make it work. They're the local workers who could be employed in their own communities but are shut out by fly-in, fly-out models. So I ask again, which everyday Territorians is this budget backing, because it's not them. The 59% of infrastructure spend going to remote and regional communities is the right priority on paper, but infrastructure without services has a long history in the Territory and it hasn't worked. With $30 million, we could fund locally led jobs and services, community health workers, educators' aides, housing officers, designed and delivered by the communities themselves. We could restore proper operating night patrols and provide real transparency about where funding goes. And we could establish a transparent reporting mechanism so Territorians can see exactly what proportion of GST revenue reaches remote communities, which is what we get it for. Mr Deputy Speaker, everyday Territorians are the children sitting in detention on remand, not convicted of anything, waiting for weeks or months. They're the families trying to keep those children on track without the support they need. They're the lawyers carrying impossible caseloads, watching young people fall through the cracks. These are the everyday Territorians that this budget is not backing. Instead, when we talk about money, this budget's committed $250 million to new prisoner work camps, and I'm very interested to hear what that actually means, while we spend more than $3,600 a day to lock up a child. With that same money, we could fund a network of community-based youth support hubs across the Territory, in Darwin, Palmerston, Alice Springs, Katherine and key remote centres, with youth workers, with mental health care, with family support, with after-hours programs that actually prevent offending. With the $15 million allocated to design new prisons, we could fund therapeutic alternatives to remand that cost less and work better, bringing us into line with international human rights law and standards that outline that remand should be a last resort for children. We could properly resource legal services so people are not set up to fail. This budget does not choose prevention, it chooses prison and labels it as safety. Madam Speaker, everyday Territorians are the women calling a domestic and family violence service and being told there's no room, and they're the workers in those services, burnt out, underpaid, and leaving faster than they can be replaced. This budget does not back those everyday Territorians. In the budget papers, funding for domestic family and violence service is cut by 10% in the jurisdiction with the highest rates of domestic violence in the country. The budget delivers a $4.25 billion infrastructure program, and not $1 of that is to DV services that have to turn women away. With $50 million less than the cost of the new prison design that I've just mentioned, and a fraction of the corrections infrastructure spend, we could ensure no woman is forced to stay in an unsafe situation because there's nowhere for her to go. We could invest in crisis accommodation, outreach in remote communities, perpetrator programs that reduce reoffending, a workforce strategy to recruit and retain specialist domestic family violence workers, because we know that the Territory loses people faster than we train them. And this is not expensive, this is fiscally smart. Every dollar spent on domestic family and violence prevention saves an estimated $7 in downstream costs, in health, in justice and in child protection. Madam Speaker, everyday Territorians are the nurses and health workers doing back-to-back shifts, burnt out and stretched beyond capacity. They're the people sitting in emergency departments for hours waiting for care that should have been available long before things reach crisis point. And this budget does not back those everyday Territorians. There's no dedicated mental health budget line in the Treasurer's speech. With $80 million redirected from corrections infrastructure, we could build a real community mental health system. Step up, step down facilities in Darwin and Alice Springs so people can get support without going to an emergency department. Mental health nurses embedded in remote community clinics, and an alcohol and drug treatment expansion that actually meets the Territory's need, rather than a fraction of what we currently serve. But this budget funds the consequences, not the causes. Madam Speaker, everyday Territorians are the households paying high power bills. They're the workers who could have secure jobs in renewable energy. They're communities who need reliable, affordable power, and these everyday Territorians are not who this budget backs. The budget continues to back the gas industry, and the scale of that commitment is staggering. Hidden in the budget papers are more than $2 billion in liabilities and subsidies tied to gas development, including Beetaloo. Hundreds of millions have already been spent with no return to Territorians to date. and even the most optimistic projections show royalties delivering less than 1% of Territory revenue. And at the same time, the Territory is carrying growing debt, projected to reach $12.5 billion, while underwriting private industry risk. We're borrowing money to subsidise an industry that's unlikely to ever pay us back. That is not a sound economic strategy. It's a public subsidy model where the risk sits with Territorians and the benefit goes somewhere else. And while that risk goes, investment in the things that actually reduce cost of living, housing, energy, services is being left behind. With $50 million, we could fund remote community microgrids, Territory-owned rooftop solar and a renewable workforce, lowering power bills, strengthening environmental resilience and creating real jobs. Instead, this budget continues to back an industry that has not delivered and expects everyday Territorians to carry the cost. Madam Speaker, everyday Territorians are the parents trying to get their kids to school, juggling work, transport, cost of living and everything else that comes with raising a family. They're also the kids who are falling behind, not because they don't want to learn, but because they need more support to get them there in the first place, and they need education that's appropriate and accessible and meets their needs, so when they're there, they stay. They're the teachers doing everything they can with limited resources, trying to keep students engaged and supported. And this budget does not back those everyday Territorians. It offers a very small investment in literacy and numeracy, but that won't help in getting kids back into the classroom. And instead of supporting families, we see a continued focus on punitive approaches like fines for school attendance. With real investment, we could support families to get kids to school and we could support kids to stay there and learn. We could invest in transport, in community-based support and early intervention that actually addresses the reasons children are not attending. We could support teachers to do the job that we know they are passionate about and trained for, and build a properly resourced teacher workforce who stay in the Territory instead of burning out and leaving. Support that works with families and children, not against them. Because you can't punish your way to better education outcomes, and you can't fix education without the teachers to make it work. Madam Speaker, if this budget were truly for everyday Territorians, we would have no child in detention on remand because there's nowhere else for them to go, no woman turned away from a service that's there to keep them safe, mental health care before crisis point, homes that people can actually afford, remote communities with services, an energy system built for the future. And that Territory is possible right now within this budget. It does not require fairy dust, it just requires the political will to make different choices. Because when this government says everyday Territorians, what this budget shows us is this: they are not talking about everyone. And the cheapest, smartest and most effective way to build a stronger Territory is to put people, all people, at the centre of every decision we make. Thank you, Madam Speaker.